Hey there guys, this is Adam in Life and we are back with another project video. In this video we'll be going over this modular rotating phone holder that I made. And as always, the video will be divided into 3 segments. First one will be the project overview, and that will just tell you what it is, what it does, etc. And then we will go on to printing and assembly. In case you decide to print this yourself, I've got recommendations on print settings and how the thing goes together. And finally, the last segment is the design segment. We did design this live on stream, so you will also be able to go back and watch all that stuff, but I have a couple additional notes to supplement that. So with all that out of the way, let's move on to the first segment, which is the overview. So here it is. This is the rotating phone holder. You could call it a Lazy Susan if you would like. The phone holder itself obviously has this rotating base, which you can put different types of bearings in. And then we have this standard, very simple phone mount that it comes with. And honestly, it's not terribly complicated. I did put these suction cup feet on it. We'll go over different aspects that you could modify on this further on in the video, but for right now, let me just grab something for this to stick to and you can see how it looks with the phone in place. So here's a basically epoxy cutting board that I had sitting around, and with the suction feet, you know, you can imagine this being your kitchen counter. Just suction feed it to the thing, put your phone in, and there we go. And I did mention that you could put a variety of bearings in there. So let me open this up right now and show you which bearings I got in there right now. And the answer is that I have no bearings in there right now. This actually rotates just fine by itself without bearings. So if you're concerned about putting something, buying bearings, you actually don't really need to. I haven't had any problem rotating it without the bearings, even though I would design it principally to be used with bearings. Turns out, not necessary, but we do have options in case you want to add some bearings to improve the movement. So first up, I've got this pseudo cage. It's really just an alignment tool. It's not a true cage, and I have tested this with both airsoft BBs, which you may have sitting around, and metallic BBs, metallic ball bearings. These are 1/4 inch metallic ball bearings. And both of these, with the same exact cage alignment feature, whatever you like to call it, work just fine. Regardless of what you have laying around here, tested it up to a 1/4 inch ball bearing, should work. If you go much smaller than that, you might run into a problem with them jamming. And also, I should note that you're probably going to want to fill it all the way up, because this is not a true cage. A true cage would, in fact, keep the ball bearings spaced evenly around the circle. Unfortunately with this one, well, not unfortunately, it's a design choice. In this one, you have space and therefore the ball bearings can get off center, not be evenly distributed. So you probably want to just fill this all the way up. The next option we have here is this microwave style bearing holder. If you look in your microwave, you probably have something that looks very similar to this. These are 623ZZ bearings. The ZZ just means double shielded. You can probably get away with less than that. But this is what I have around. This is what I use in a lot of projects because it has a 3mm ID. And you just put this in here and it spins just fine, as you can see. Putting that back together. On top here, we have a GoPro style mount. That's the mount that comes with the project, but I have provided a template to make other mounts. Basically, we just have 2 mounting holes here that you can mount anything to it. So if you have a different style phone mount that you want to use, you very well may be able to adapt that and use that instead of what I provide here. The top half right here has these dovetails in it, which just slide into the bottom half, and that keeps everything aligned, and they run extremely smooth printing with PETG like I have here. Otherwise, around the back here, you can see that we're using a rubber band to tension this. The rubber band works really well. It's really snappy. I enjoy how it's working, and it's just on these 2 little posts right here that you can see. And that's all it is. You will see that I have this little black piece attached to the rubber band because it's too long. That's just a tensioner. I will have that linked in the description if you would like it. Otherwise, just find a rubber band of the correct size. That's the alternative. The final thing to mention about the project, and important note, is that you may find, depending on your print quality, that it loosens and tightens as you rotate it. Now, in general, you're probably not going to be spinning at 360 degrees. You're probably going to spin it, let's say, 90 degrees to the side as you walk across the kitchen, let's say, and then you'll rotate it back to exactly where you had it before when you walk back. So it's unlikely in a real life scenario to happen, but in case it does, I just wanted to mention that obviously you can open up these holes a little bit. The through hole is easier to open up since that's just a 3mm hole, so you just grab a 3mm drill bit and open that up. The inset for the screw top is a little bit more difficult since obviously drill bits are pointed and therefore you can't actually scrape the bottom of that with the drill bit. So in that case, you might have to use an X-Acto knife. And also I could recommend, because it may not be necessarily the tightness of it, but it may be the roughness of the finish right there in the inset that might be tightening and gripping the screw and causing it to tighten down. In that case, you might just want to put 2 washers in there, just 2 3mm washers, and that should remove that friction between the top of the bolt, or the bottom of the bolt, and the top of the print. Moving on to printing and assembly. So print settings are very straightforward. Use whatever you would like. 0.2 is just fine. No special settings on this one. It was designed to be printed as easy as possible, and you should always be printing on flat surfaces. All the prints print on flat surfaces. So for example, on the bearing, the 623 turntable bearing holder, with that has a flat side on it, so make sure you're printing on the flat side of that. Otherwise, everything is very straightforward and does prints without supports. In terms of assembly, obviously the feet that you choose to use will determine how those get assembled. All feet are intended to be mounted with these 2 mounting holes on the bottom, so in theory that will be the same, but it really depends on what you decide to do for feet, how exactly those to go together. So one of those things, if you get a remix that has different kinds of feet, just go by whatever they tell you to do. Otherwise, these 3mm bolts go into the captured 3mm hex nuts inside the base, and that attaches that in theory should attach the feet to the base, assuming that it's set up the way I intended this. For this specific model of feet, the M3 bolts are 8mm long that I'm using. As always, it's going to depend on what feet you're using as to the length of the bolt, and it also depends on what cage you're using on the inside to make sure that the length of the bolt sticking out the other end is not interfering with the cage. So there's a lot of variables there. Just make sure you check before you go ahead and print. Next up is whatever cage you're going to be using, that will be assembled in any particular way. Just make sure you check with that. For example, the one with the 623 bearings here, you just throw an M3 bolt right through the bearing and directly into the print, and you're good. After you have that done, you'll put an M3, I'm using an M3 by 20 here, a bolt through the center, and there's a capture nut on the bottom. That capture nut should have been inserted before you put the feet on in theory, unless your foot model happens to give you space to put it in afterwards. Again, as with the feet, this M3 by 20 that I'm talking about here is relative to the feet that I'm using and the cage that I'm using. It may be that you want a smaller or longer bolt depending on, again, what feet you have on here, what cage you have on the inside. But for this specific setup, the M3 by 20 works just fine, especially because the feet that I'm using has a through hole as well, so it can pass through the feet's mount and it will not be long enough to hit the ground afterwards. And remember at the end here, just to check to make sure that you haven't tightened it down too far and it's moving freely. Moving on to the mount on top to mount the phone. Again, as I keep on coming back to this, how you attach this phone mount will come down to some degree on what phone mount you have. Again, my intention here is that you mount it using 2 M3 bolts, and here I'm using M3 by 8s. just like on the bottom, but that may change depending on the mount you use. And any attachment features between the mount and the phone holder itself, you'll also have to figure out for the mount that you have. In particular, on this model that I'm using here, this is an M5x30 bolt that connects the GoPro mount to the phone holder. One thing I would like to point out with this specific model here, again, if you're using the provided models for your phone holder, now as you can see, the base is offset slightly from center, which means that it looks best on camera and in pictures with the phone facing the opposite direction, facing towards the center of the disc. That way everything looks more centered. But the fact of the matter is that in practice it's actually better for it to be spun back the other way, so that it's leaning backwards over top the center when you put your phone in, because you're going to lean it backwards probably in order to see your phone, and therefore you want that weight to be over top of center. Once you have your mount and bottom section of the phone holder in place, then it's a very simple matter of lining up these dovetails right here and sliding them into place. Again, assuming that you're using the same phone mount that I provided with the model. And the way we are gripping the phone here, as I've mentioned before, is with a rubber band. So you will just go ahead and loop this rubber band around the bottom and around the top tongues or fingers, however you like to say that, on the back of the phone holder. And like I said, that provides a really satisfying snap. I'm really happy with how that turned out, and I haven't had any problems with getting the phone in and out. The final thing to mention about assembly is that depending on which mount and feet you have, you may be able to attach those independently, which the benefit of which, I should say, is that you can also possibly take the whole entire Lazy Susan apart and change out cages if you want without removing the rest of the mounts. That's how it works with this specific model. I made this so that you can still access the through bolt and therefore take it apart and change out the cage if you need to. That's a nice feature. Again, if you're remixing this and making your own mounts and feet, which I encourage you to, and maybe consider keeping that feature, keeping in the ability for users, makers to take the whole entire Lazy Susan apart without removing your mount or your feet. That seems convenient to me, but it's one of those things, if you can't because of the design, then you can't. And that brings us on to the design portion. As mentioned, I designed this live on stream, so I really encourage you, if you would like in-depth on how I went about deciding how this should look and what choices I made, by all means go and watch that video. I'll touch on a couple of these test pieces here. This is all my test pieces that I had for this whole entire project. Everything else came out just perfectly. So I'll just run through these really quick just so that you know as little tidbits of what happened. So this first one, this is a cage obviously for the ball bearings. For the 1/4 inch metal ball bearings, I found that it was just a little tight, so I just changed the size on that guy and it was good. Next up was this stupid mistake that I made with the mount for the GoPro. I got distracted during the stream and forgot to change the start point for the pattern along path to be 0 instead of 0.5. And that was a stupid on my part, and obviously these fins printed way too close together. And this last thing is something that nobody has seen until now, and these are the feet for the Lazy Susan. I designed these at the very end of the last stream, and therefore I didn't have any further video commenting on how it turned out, and therefore you get to find out about it now. So obviously I designed this with 2 suction cups to begin with, and it's one of those things I was just like, could be 1 suction cup, could be 2, doesn't necessarily matter. I then printed it out and realized that the suction cups, being as they have some thickness, therefore bring the rest of the phone mount off the ground, which means that it wobbles. So obviously I switched that over to 3 suction cups, giving me 3 points of contact with the surface, and it no longer wobbles. So that was an easy fix, just a little bit of oversight on my part, not thinking about how it would be sitting on the counter. And that concludes this project video. Thank you very much for watching. I had a blast doing this, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well. It was a very fun experience. Just for the record, one of those things I always say, you shouldn't really include real-time information in a video because people are going to be watching this hopefully years into the future. But little tidbit, this was designed for a Prusa Flash contest, and that's what prompted me to make this thing, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that turns out, seeing how we do, seeing how many people really like this project. So this is exciting. I'm very excited about this. So as always, one of those things, do the YouTube things that everybody else tells you to do. I don't need to tell you to do them, please. And otherwise, have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening wherever you're in the world, and I will catch you next time.